Vareth, 7 was not a beautiful moon. It was hot, wet, and loud. The jungle never stopped making noise, insects clicking, strange birds screaming in the high branches, water dripping from every leaf. The air was thick and heavy, like breathing through a warm wet cloth. Everything smelled like mud and something burning even before the fire started. Sergeant Finn Adler had been on worse postings. Not many but a few. He stood at the edge of the convoy's resting point, rifle across his chest, watching the tree line. Around him, 12 soldiers moved quietly, checking equipment, eating cold rations, talking in low voices. Behind them sat 3 large transport vehicles, each one carrying supplies, diplomatic papers, and 2 large sealed crates. Inside those crates, according to the mission file, were 4 Drackery dragon hatchlings, young ones barely old enough to open their eyes fully. They were being moved to a safer location after their nesting site was flagged as compromised. Finn had not seen them. He did not need to. His job was simple: get the convoy from point A to point B without anyone dying. He was good at simple jobs. He was 29 years old, not especially tall, not especially loud. He had short brown hair, a scar across his left hand from a training accident 3 years ago, and a habit of being the last one to speak in any room. The other soldiers liked him well enough. The Drackery diplomats who traveled with the convoy mostly ignored him, which was fine. Finn did not need to be noticed. He just needed to do his job. He checked his rifle one more time and looked at the sky. The sun of Vareth 7 was setting behind the thick canopy, turning everything orange and shadow. They had 2 more hours of travel before they reached the relay station. After that, someone else's problem. He almost allowed himself to feel relieved. Then the first explosion hit. It came from the left, a sharp, white flash that tore through the tree line and flipped the lead transport vehicle like it was made of paper. The sound arrived half a second later, slamming into Finn's chest like a fist. He was already moving before the echo faded, grabbing the nearest soldier by the collar and pulling him flat against the ground. Contact left. Get down. The jungle erupted. Figures moved through the trees, fast, armored, carrying weapons that fired in short, sharp bursts. Mercenaries. At least 20 of them, maybe more, spreading out in a wide arc around the convoy. They were organized. They knew exactly where to hit and how. This was not a random attack. Finn rolled behind the rear wheel of the second transport and returned fire. Beside him, 2 soldiers did the same. He could hear shouting from the far side of the convoy, then screaming, the kind of screaming that meant someone was already down and not getting back up. The Drackery diplomats were running. Finn could see them, 3 tall, scaled figures moving toward the jungle, which was the wrong direction entirely. He opened his mouth to shout at them and then watched as 2 mercenaries stepped out of the trees directly in their path. The diplomats stopped. Then they dropped. Finn looked away. He focused on what was in front of him. The second transport was burning now, a slow orange fire creeping up the side panel. His earpiece crackled with broken voices. Soldiers calling out positions, calling for backup, calling for things that were not coming. The relay station was too far. The distress signal needed 4 minutes to bounce off the nearest satellite. 4 minutes was a very long time. 3 of his soldiers were still fighting. Then 2. Then 1, and then Finn was alone behind the burning vehicle with half a magazine left and blood running down his right arm from a graze he did not remember receiving. The mercenaries were moving toward the sealed crates. That was what they wanted. Not the supplies. Not the diplomatic files. The crates. The hatchlings. Finn reloaded. He did not think about odds. He did not think about the number of enemies or the state of his arm or the fact that backup was not coming in time. He thought about the crates and the small creatures inside them, and the fact that nobody else was left to do anything about it. He moved. He went low and fast, using the burning wreckage as cover, cutting through the smoke. A mercenary turned and raised his weapon. Finn was already past him, shoulder driving hard into the man's ribs, sending him into the dirt. He kept moving. A shot hit the ground 2 inches from his left boot. He did not slow down. He reached the crates just as 2 mercenaries pried the first one open. They pulled out a hatchling, young, no bigger than a large dog, covered in dark blue scales that caught the firelight. It screamed, a high and terrible sound, and thrashed against the hands holding it. Finn shot both men. He moved to the second crate. It was already cracked open on one side, the lock broken. He pulled it fully open and looked inside. 3 hatchlings. All dead. Whether from the blast or the smoke or simply the shock of it, he did not know. He looked at them for 1 second, and then he heard a sound behind the crate, a small, broken whimper coming from underneath a fallen piece of the transport side panel. He moved the panel. Underneath it was a hatchling. The smallest one he had ever seen, even smaller than the one the mercenaries had grabbed, which was now nowhere to be seen. This one was curled into a tight ball, wings folded flat against its back, shaking from nose to tail. Its scales were pale gold with faint markings along the side of its face. Its eyes were squeezed shut. It was alive. Finn crouched down. He did not speak. He simply put his hand out, palm up, and waited. The hatchling opened one eye. It looked at his hand for a long moment. Then it looked at his face. Then it made a sound, not a scream, not a cry, but something smaller and quieter, like a question. Finn kept his hand still. The hatchling pressed its nose against his palm. Something about that small gesture hit him somewhere deep and wordless. He closed his fingers gently and pulled the hatchling close to his chest. It was trembling badly. He could feel its heartbeat, fast and light like a bird. He stood up. The mercenaries had regrouped. He could hear them coming back around the burning vehicles, voices clipped and sharp, checking positions. There were at least 6 of them still standing between him and the tree line. His arm was bleeding more now. His last magazine had 7 rounds. He looked down at the hatchling. It looked back up at him with wide amber eyes. Finn turned to face the mercenaries. He did not run. There was nowhere to run to, and the hatchling could not survive being carried at a sprint through open fire. So he stood his ground at the rear of the wreckage, putting himself and the burning transport between the hatchling and the incoming guns. He fired carefully, making every shot count, buying seconds. The mercenaries spread out. They were going to flank him. He knew it. He shifted left to cut off the angle, kept the hatchling pressed against his chest with his left arm, kept firing with his right. The first shot hit him in the side. He grunted and kept standing. The second hit his shoulder. His arm went numb. He switched the rifle to his left hand without thinking, the hatchling tucked against his chest between his arm and his body, and kept going. The third shot hit him square in the back. His legs stopped working. He went down slowly, not all at once. First to one knee, then forward, turning as he fell so that his body landed over the hatchling instead of on top of it. He felt the ground hit him. He felt the heat of the burning vehicles. He felt the hatchling moving under him, pushing against his chest, making that small questioning sound again. He tried to answer. Nothing came out. The world went dark at the edges and then all at once, quiet. The mercenaries heard the sound first. A low, building hum, not mechanical, not an alarm. Something alive. They turned toward the pile of wreckage and the fallen soldier and saw a glow. Pale gold at first, then bright orange, then white. The hatchling had crawled onto Finn's chest. It had its head down, eyes closed, and it was breathing something over him, steady, slow, like it was pouring every piece of itself into the act. The fire that came from its throat was nothing like ordinary flame. It did not burn the ground. It did not spread. It moved across Finn's body like water finding its shape, and where it touched, the air itself seemed to hum. The mercenaries looked at each other. Then they ran. The jungle went quiet again. The fires burned low. The smoke drifted up into the orange sky of Vareth, 7. The hatchling did not move from his chest. Kept breathing. Finn did not wake up all at once. It came in pieces. First sound, a low hum, steady and mechanical like something breathing nearby. Then light, pale and cold, pressing against his eyelids. Then pain, but strange pain, not sharp, more like heat sitting deep inside his bones, like he had swallowed something burning and it had never gone out. He tried to open his eyes. It took longer than it should have. The ceiling above him was high and gray, made of smooth curved stone that caught the light and held it softly. Not metal. Not plastic. Something older. He did not recognize it. He turned his head slowly and saw walls of the same material, and along those walls, equipment he did not fully understand, tubes of pale fluid, instruments that made no sound but moved on their own, small floating lights that drifted like they were thinking. He was lying on a flat surface that was warm underneath him. Not a bed exactly. A slab, smooth and slightly curved at the edges, with something soft beneath his back that he could not identify. He tried to sit up. His arms did not respond the way he expected. His right arm moved but slowly, and when he looked at it he stopped moving entirely. Along the inside of his forearm, starting at the wrist and running up past the elbow, the skin had changed. It was not skin anymore, not entirely. There were scales, small, flat, pale gold in color, edged faintly with something that caught the light like heat haze. They were not rough. They were smooth and close to the surface, like they had grown up from underneath and settled in. The edges where scale met skin were clean, not raw, not wounded. Like it had always been that way. Finn stared at his arm for a long time. Then he looked at the rest of himself. The scales were not only on his arm. There were patches along his collarbone, along the left side of his ribs where the shots had hit him, along his right shoulder. Each place he had been wounded. Each place he should have died. He raised one hand slowly and touched his face. His skin felt normal there. He let out a slow breath. A sound at the doorway made him turn his head. A figure stood at the entrance, tall, broad, covered in dark green scales, with a long angular face and pale eyes that caught the light in the way animals' eyes did at night. Drackery. A healer, judging by the pale cloth wrapped around its upper arms and the instrument case it was holding. It was staring at Finn the way someone stares at something they were not fully prepared to see. Finn tried to speak. His voice came out rough and low, like something had scraped the inside of his throat clean. "Where am I?" The healer did not answer immediately. It stepped inside carefully, keeping near the wall, and set its instrument case down on a surface near the door without taking its eyes off Finn. Then it said in flat and careful common speech, "Drackery Medical Station. Orbital Ring. Vethra System." Finn processed that. How long? 11 days. He closed his eyes for a moment. 11 days. The convoy was gone. The soldiers were gone. The diplomats were gone. He already knew that. He had known it the moment the third shot hit him. He opened his eyes again. "The hatchling," he said. "The small one. Gold scales." The healer said nothing. "Is she here?" Still nothing. The healer picked up one of its instruments and moved toward him slowly, like it was approaching something that might bite. Finn watched it check the readings on the equipment beside him, watched its pale eyes flick from the screen to him and back again, watched its careful deliberate movements. "I need to know if she is here," Finn said. "You need to rest," the healer said. "I need to know if she is alive." The healer looked at him for a moment. Then it said, "She is alive," and went back to its instruments. Finn lay back. Something in his chest released, a tightness he had been holding without realizing it. He stared at the ceiling and breathed slowly and let himself be still. He did not notice his eyes in the reflection of the equipment panel. He did not see what the healer saw every time it looked at him, the faint orange glow sitting deep inside his irises, like an ember behind glass, steady and warm and entirely not human. They came on the 4th day after he woke up. 3 of them moving through the doorway in a line. Old, all of them, Finn could tell by the way their scales had lightened at the edges, the way they moved, deliberate and heavy with something that was not quite age but close to it. Authority maybe. The kind that had been carried for a long time. The one in the middle was the oldest. Her scales were almost white at the edges, dark gray at the center, and her eyes were the pale gold of something that had seen a great deal and stopped being surprised by most of it. She looked at Finn the way someone reads a document, carefully, completely, looking for the part that changes the meaning of everything else. Behind her stood a younger Drackery, holding a flat recording surface, and beside her was a broad heavy male whose posture said soldier even though he wore no weapon. "I am Elder Drava," the old one said. Her common speech was precise and accented and very clear. "You are the human from Vareth, 7. Finn Adler," he said. "Sergeant." "You are no longer only that," she said. He waited. She studied him for another moment. Then she said, "What was done to you on Vareth 7, the fire the hatchling used? It is called soul fire. It is a bonding act. Ancient. It has not occurred in 3,000 years. It is performed by a hatchling only once, only for a chosen guardian, and it cannot be undone." She paused. "It was never performed on a human." Finn looked at his arm. At the scales along his forearm catching the pale light of the room. "The soul fire changed you," Drava continued. "Your body temperature is 17 degrees above normal human range. Your wounds sealed in a way our healers have not seen before. Your eyes carry the bond mark." She said it plainly without softness. "You are what our people call Corvale. A bonded guardian. It is not a title. It is a condition. It is permanent." The room was very quiet. "Our council met this morning," Drava said. "The Corvale bond is sacred to our people. The idea of it existing in a non-Drackery body is," she paused, choosing her word carefully, "troubling to many of our elders. There are those among us who believe that the only resolution is to remove the problem." Finn looked at her steadily. "You mean kill me?" "Yes," she said. No softness in it, no apology. Just the word. He held her gaze. He did not look away and he did not speak immediately, and in that silence he thought about the jungle moon and the burning convoy and the small gold hatchling pressing its nose into his palm. He thought about 11 days of sleep he did not remember and scales growing along his arm from the inside out and eyes that apparently glowed now. He thought about what question mattered. "The hatchling," he said. "The one from Vareth, 7. Is she safe? Drava looked at him. Not at his arm, not at his eyes, not at the scales along his collarbone that were visible above the edge of his covering. At his face. She looked at his face for a long and quiet moment, and something in her expression shifted. Not much, barely at all, but enough. She is safe, Drava said. Is she being taken care of properly? She is. Though she has refused to eat without, Drava paused briefly, without being near you. Finn nodded slowly. He lay back against the surface and looked at the ceiling. Then do whatever you need to do, he said quietly. I just needed to know that. The recording Drackery behind Drava had stopped writing. The soldier beside her had gone very still. Drava herself stood without moving for a long moment, looking at the human lying calmly on the medical slab, scaled and ember-eyed and burning hot, who had just been told he might be executed and had used his one response to ask about a hatchling's meals. She turned to the soldier beside her and said one word in Drackery. He nodded and left the room. She turned back to Finn. The vote is cancelled, she said. Finn did not smile. He did not look relieved or triumphant. He simply looked at the ceiling with those quiet glowing eyes and said, Can I see her? Drava looked at him for one more moment. Then she stepped aside from the doorway. Down the corridor there was a sound, small claws on smooth stone, quick and uneven, getting louder. Then the hatchling came through the door at speed, stumbled over her own feet, righted herself, and crossed the room in 4 clumsy running steps before climbing onto Finn's chest and sitting down firmly like she had decided that was where she lived now. Finn put his scaled arm around her without a word. The hatchling closed her eyes. The ember glow in Finn's eyes burned a little warmer. The training ground was a wide open space carved into the rock face of Vethra Prime's northern range. It was not built for comfort. The floor was hard-packed dirt mixed with gravel, uneven in places, sloped in others. The walls on 3 sides were natural stone, rough and dark, streaked with old minerals that caught the morning light. The 4th side was open to the wind, which came down from the mountains cold and sharp and smelling like iron. There were no soft edges anywhere. Everything about the place said the same thing: this is not where you rest. This is where you are made into something. Or broken. Depending on who you were. Finn stood at the entrance on the first morning and looked at it all. 12 Drackery trainees stood across the yard from him, each one broad and scaled and somewhere between 1 and 2 heads taller than him. They looked at him the way you look at something that has wandered into the wrong place. Not with anger, not yet, just with the flat certainty that this was going to end badly for it. Trainer Breck stood at the front. He was not the tallest Drackery Finn had ever seen, but he was built like something assembled for a specific purpose and nothing else. His scales were deep brown, almost black at the shoulder, and he had a scar running from his left jaw down the side of his neck that had healed badly and stayed that way. His eyes were flat and pale and they moved over Finn once, top to bottom, bottom to top, and then looked away like the assessment was already complete. You will do what the others do, Breck said. No welcome. No explanation. If you cannot do what the others do, you will do it until you can. If you still cannot, you will leave. He paused. Most things leave. Finn said nothing. Breck looked at him once more. You are small. Yes, Finn said. You are soft. Less than I was. Breck's expression did not change. He turned away. Begin. The first week was the worst. The Drackery training regimen was built around bodies that could take direct hits from large animals and stand back up. The morning runs covered distances that left Finn's legs shaking before the first rest point. The strength drills used weights that he physically could not move the way the others moved them. He had to drag them, push them sideways, find different angles. The combat drills were worse. He was paired against trainees who outweighed him by 100 pounds of muscle and scale and who had been raised in a culture where physical dominance was simply the first language of every interaction. He lost every sparring session the first week. Every single one. He went down hard, came back up, went down again. He did not complain. He did not ask for adjustments. He studied each loss carefully, where he had stood, how he had moved, what the other trainee had telegraphed before the strike landed. Breck watched all of it. He said nothing helpful and nothing discouraging. He watched and he noted and he moved on. By the second week Finn was losing faster, which sounds wrong but was not. He was losing faster because he was learning which fights were already over before they started and spending his energy on the ones that were not. A Drackery trainee twice his weight in a straight strength contest was already over. The same trainee after 20 minutes of being made to chase Finn around the yard in cold wind was a different problem. The other trainees found this irritating. One of them, a broad young male named Sevik, the largest in the group, made a habit of targeting Finn in group drills. Not out of cruelty exactly. More like he had decided that putting the human on the ground quickly and repeatedly was simply the efficient thing to do. He was not wrong that it was efficient. Finn went down every time. He also came back up every time, which Sevik found increasingly annoying. "You should stay down," Sevik said after the fourth time, standing over him. Finn got up and wiped blood from his lip. "Not how it works," he said, and reset his stance. Breck, standing at the edge of the yard, watched this exchange. He did not intervene. He turned slightly to make a note on his record board and then went back to watching. Saya watched from behind the low barrier at the yard's edge, where hatchlings in their own training program were allowed to observe adult sessions. She was getting bigger, faster than average, the hatchling trainer said, as if she was in a hurry about it. She watched Finn go down and get back up with the focused attention of someone studying something important. One of the other hatchlings asked her once why the human kept getting hit. Saya said, "He's learning." "He keeps losing," the other hatchling said. "Not the same thing," Saya said, and went back to watching. By the 6th week the other trainees had stopped expecting Finn to quit. They had not started respecting him yet, that was a different thing, but the assumption that he would simply disappear one morning was gone. He was a fixed part of the yard now, the small one who showed up every day, who found unorthodox angles on every drill, who would chase a problem for 3 hours past the point where anyone else had walked away from it. Breck adjusted the drills without announcing why. The runs got longer. The combat scenarios got more complicated. The weights were replaced with problem-based challenges. Move this from here to there, using only what is available by the time the bell rings. Breck never said these changes were because of Finn. They simply happened. Finn noticed. He said nothing. He was training extra hours by the 8th week, after the yard was empty before it filled again. He worked on the things he could not fix in front of others. The gaps in his footwork. The way he compensated for his shorter reach. He developed a habit of mapping every space he entered, exits, sight lines, surfaces, angles, because he had learned early that the only fights he won were the ones he had already thought through before they started. The ember glow in his eyes was a little stronger when he pushed hard. The other trainees had noticed it. They did not mention it, but they noticed it. Saya began incorporating his approach into her own hatchling drills. Her training instructors noted that she was developing unusual habits. She planned before she moved, she chose position carefully, she showed less interest in direct confrontation than the other hatchlings and more interest in making the problem come to her. They mentioned it to Elder Drava as an oddity. Drava said she was not surprised. The final trial came at the end of the 3rd month. Breck explained it simply on the morning of the trial. There was an animal in the far canyon. A Varek, a large predatory creature native to Vethra Prime's rock ranges, roughly the size and temperament of something designed by nature specifically to end smaller things. It was real and it was loose, and it was the trainee's problem to resolve. The trial ended when the animal was no longer a threat. 3 trainees from previous years had not come back from this trial. The Drakari trainees went in pairs. They came back with injuries and the animal's kill confirmed. Standard resolution. Expected outcome. Breck noted each pair's performance in flat, careful language and moved on. Then it was Finn's turn. He was the last because he was always last on the list. He went in alone. Not because the rules required it, pairs were standard, but because he had asked to. Breck had looked at him for a moment and then written it down without comment. Finn came back 2.5 hours later. He came back without major injuries. He came back with the Varek walking behind him, not dead, not wounded, but moving with the slow, heavy steps of something that was deeply exhausted and had been gently and persistently refused every opportunity to rest until it simply stopped trying. Finn had a long rope of braided equipment cord looped loosely around its neck, more symbolic than restraining, and he was walking at a pace the animal could follow. He led it to the containment area at the canyon's edge, guided it inside and closed the gate. Then he walked back across the yard and stood in front of Breck. The yard was completely silent. The other trainees were staring. Even Sevik was staring. Saya had both front feet on top of the barrier wall and was stretching as tall as she could to see. Breck looked at Finn. Then he looked at the containment area. Then he looked back at Finn. He did not speak for a long time. The wind came down from the mountains, cold and sharp. Somewhere in the containment area the Varek settled down with a heavy sound and went still. Breck looked at Finn one more time. "How?" he said. Finn said, "I didn't let it rest. Every time it stopped I moved it again. Slowly. For 2 hours. Until it had nothing left." He paused. "It was never going to outrun me. I just had to make sure it knew that." Breck was quiet again. Then he said, low and without theater, "You fight like something that has everything to protect." Finn looked at him steadily. Same thing, he said. Breck turned away and wrote something long on his record board. Nobody saw what it said. 3 years after Vareth, 7, Finn Adler was not easy to miss. Not because he was loud. He was still the quietest person in most rooms. Not because he was large. He was still smaller than every Drackery he stood beside, and he stood beside a lot of them now. He was not easy to miss because of what walked next to him. A juvenile dragon, chest height on a grown man, with pale gold scales and dark amber eyes and a way of moving through a crowd that made the crowd move first. Saya had grown fast, and she had grown deliberately, like she had somewhere to be. She was not fully adult yet, that was still years away, but she was well past Hatchling, well past the small trembling creature that had pressed her nose into Finn's palm in a burning jungle. Her wingspan was 12 feet when fully extended. Her scales had deepened from pale gold to something richer, like old metal in warm light, with the faint markings along her jaw now sharp and clear. She moved quietly for her size, which was something she had learned from Finn without being taught. They had been assigned together for 2 years now, a formal posting, unusual but not unprecedented, under the Drackery Peacekeeping Authority. They went where they were set. They did the work. They came back. The galaxy had started to notice them mostly through other people's reports. A border dispute on the Cathani frontier, resolved without escalation. A rescue operation on a collapsed mining station that 3 other teams had assessed as unworkable. Small things mostly. The kind of work that did not make announcements but accumulated quietly in the records of people who paid attention to such things. The Cavrith Syndicate was one of those people. The posting that changed things was a transit assignment. Simple on paper. Finn and Saya were tasked with escorting a diplomatic package from a neutral station called Vora's 9 to a Drackery relay point 4 hours away by standard shuttle. The package was a sealed data container holding treaty terms between 3 minor systems. Low risk. Routine. Finn had learned to distrust the word routine. Vora's 9 was a mid-sized transit station, busy and loud, the kind of place where dozens of species moved through daily and nobody paid much attention to anyone else. Finn walked through it with Saya at his left side, the data container secured to his back, moving through the crowd at an even pace. He was watching the exits. He was always watching the exits. Saya's head came up first. She did it subtly, a small lift of the chin, nostrils widening slightly, eyes tracking left toward the commercial corridor. Finn saw it and did not change his pace and did not look where she was looking. Not yet. He pressed 2 fingers against his forearm, their signal for hold position, and turned casually toward a display panel on the wall like he was checking transit schedules. In the reflection of the panel he counted 4 figures. They were dressed as station workers, which was competent enough, but they were moving in a pattern that station workers did not move in, spread too evenly, angled too deliberately, each one positioned to cut off a different direction of exit. They were also all the same species, which on a station this diverse was unlikely unless it was intentional. Finn had seen this before. Not this exact configuration but the shape of it. People moving like they were about to close a box. He was the box. He pressed 3 fingers against his forearm, Saya's signal for move on my step, and walked forward. They came fast. All 4 at once, which was professional, closing from different angles with devices that Finn recognized as restraint tech, the kind that locked joints and dropped body temperature, designed to subdue large creatures. 2 were angled toward Saya. 2 toward Finn. Finn stepped left instead of forward. The 2 coming for him had expected him to move straight or stop. The step left took him out of the path of the first one entirely and put him inside the reach of the second before the second had adjusted. He drove his elbow hard into the operative's chest, took the restraint device out of his hand before he finished falling and turned. Saya had already dealt with hers. She had not used fire. She had used her wing, a sharp lateral sweep that hit both operatives simultaneously and put them into the station wall hard enough that they did not get back up immediately. She pulled the wing back in, stepped over one of them and looked at Finn. Finn looked back. The whole thing had taken about 8 seconds. The station crowd had scattered back in a wide circle, leaving an open space around them. Somewhere an alarm was starting to sound, slow and uncertain, like it was not sure yet what it was alarming about. The first operative Finn had put down was trying to get up. Finn crouched beside him, took the communication device from his belt before he could reach it, and looked at him calmly. "Who sent you?" Finn said. The operative said nothing. He was looking at Finn's eyes, at the ember glow that got brighter when Finn's heart rate was up, with an expression that was trying very hard to be professional and not quite managing it. "The data container," Finn said. "Or her." The operative's eyes moved to Saya for just a fraction of a second. Finn stood up. "Right," he said. He secured all 4 of them with their own restraint tech and contacted station security, who arrived 6 minutes later looking flustered and unhelpful. Finn gave them a clear and precise account of events, handed over the communication device, and asked them to flag the incident to Drakari Authority. Then he picked up the data container, checked that it was undamaged, and looked at Saya. "We're going to be late," he said. Saya made a low sound that was not quite agreement and not quite amusement but somewhere between both. They made the relay point with 40 minutes to spare. The report that came back through Kavarth Syndicate channels was short. It had a full account of the operative's approach, the positioning, the execution of the intercept. It noted that the human had responded before the intercept fully closed, which should not have been possible given the timing. It noted that the Dragon had neutralized 2 trained operatives without causing significant structural damage to the station, which indicated a level of situational control unusual for a juvenile. It noted that the human had then conducted a brief and apparently productive interrogation while managing crowd presence and station security simultaneously. At the bottom, under the assessment field, the senior operative had written one line: "Do not engage without full force." The Syndicate's director read the report twice. Then he forwarded it to his intelligence division with a single instruction: find out everything about them. The peacekeeping summit on Station Voris 12 happened 3 weeks later. It was a large gathering. Representatives from 14 systems, Drakari elders, human diplomatic staff, and a number of smaller species whose names Finn could read but not pronounce reliably. He and Saya were present as part of the Drakari security detail, which mostly meant standing in rooms and looking reliable. Finn was standing in the reception corridor when Ambassador Lena Voss found him. She was human, one of the senior diplomatic staff, somewhere in her 50s, with sharp eyes and the manner of someone who had spent decades in rooms where every word was being measured. She stopped beside him and looked at Saya, who was sitting at Finn's left with her tail curled neatly and her eyes moving across the room in slow, steady sweeps. "I've read the Voris 9 report," Voss said. Finn said nothing. "And the Cathani report. And the station rescue." She paused. "You've been offered 3 safe postings in the past year. Administrative roles. Training positions. Good work, important work." She looked at him. "You turned all of them down." "Yes," Finn said. "Why?" Finn was quiet for a moment. He looked at Saya. Saya was watching a group of delegates across the room with calm amber eyes, reading them the way she read every room, patient and thorough. "She goes where trouble is," Finn said. "So do I." Voss looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at Saya. Then she looked back at Finn with an expression that had moved past assessment into something closer to understanding. "The Syndicate is going to come back," she said quietly. "With more." "I know," Finn said. "That doesn't concern you." Finn watched Saya track a movement across the room, saw her relax when it turned out to be nothing, saw her go back to her steady patient watch. "They came for her," he said. "They'll come again. That's not something I can make safe by taking a desk job somewhere." He paused. "The only thing I can do is make it very expensive for them every time they try." Voss was quiet for a moment. "The galaxy is starting to notice you," she said. Finn looked straight ahead. "I know," he said again. Across the room, Saya's amber eyes caught the light and held it, warm and steady, watching everything. The outer colonies did not appear on most galactic maps. Not because they were hidden. Just because nobody had bothered to update the maps. They were small settlements, mostly clusters of buildings on the edges of systems that the larger governments had claimed on paper and then largely forgotten about. The people there were farmers, miners, small traders. They were not important to anyone with power. That was exactly why the Kavarth Syndicate had chosen them. The assignment came through official channels but nobody wanted it. 3 other teams had assessed it and passed. The intelligence was thin, the resources were minimal, and the political will to act was essentially zero. The colonies were too small to matter to anyone who made decisions in large rooms. Finn read the file once and accepted it the same day. The file contained population counts, settlement locations, and a record of communication blackouts. Stations that had stopped transmitting over the past 8 months, one by one at irregular intervals. It also contained one photograph taken by a passing survey drone. Finn looked at the photograph for a long time. It showed a settlement called Marin's Post, 83 registered residents, agricultural, established 12 years ago. In the photograph there were no buildings standing and no people visible, and the fields had been burned so thoroughly that the ground itself looked black. He showed it to Saya. She looked at it with her amber eyes and then looked at him. They left the next morning. The first 3 colonies they reached were the same as the photograph. Burned. Emptied. Done carefully and completely, The way you do something when you do not want questions asked about it. No bodies left behind. No equipment. No records. Just scorched ground and the kind of silence that sits in a place after everything living has been removed from it. Colony leader Ada Marsh met them at the fourth settlement, a place called Crest Hill, still standing, still populated, but barely. She was a small tired woman with gray in her hair and the look of someone who had been afraid for a long time and had run out of energy to show it. She met Finn and Saya at the edge of the settlement and looked at them both without much hope in her face. "You're it," she said. "Yes," Finn said. She looked at Saya. Then back at Finn. "Two of you." "Yes." Ada looked at the ground for a moment. Then she said, "They come at night. Syndicate ships, 4 or 5 at a time. They give 1 hour of warning on the emergency channel. After that," she stopped. "Most people leave when they get the warning. The ones who don't," she stopped again. "How many settlements still standing?" Finn said. 4. "Including this one." She looked at him. "For now." Finn asked her everything she knew. Timing, approach patterns, ship types, how many soldiers came down from each vessel, what weapons they carried, how long they stayed. Ada answered all of it in a flat, careful voice, like she had been waiting a long time for someone to ask. Saya sat beside Finn and listened and her eyes moved between them both. That night Finn set up a position on the high ground above Crest Hill and waited. The syndicate ships came at the 3rd hour after dark. 4 of them, dropping in low and quiet, which meant they had done this enough times that they were no longer concerned about being seen. Finn counted soldiers deploying from the landing ramps, 22 total, spreading out in the pattern he had expected from Ada's description. He and Saya hit them from 2 directions at once. It was not a clean fight. It was not meant to be. It was meant to be expensive and confusing and short, and it was all 3. Saya came in from above and Finn came in from the tree line, and the syndicate soldiers, who had been expecting empty ground and frightened farmers, found something else entirely. 3 ships got back into the air. 1 did not. Crest Hill was still standing at dawn. They moved through the outer colonies for 3 weeks. Finn and Saya hit the syndicate's ground teams hard and fast and then relocated before the response could organize. They were never in the same place twice. They communicated with Ada through a relay system Finn built from salvaged equipment, and they kept the remaining settlements informed and as safe as anything could be kept in a situation like that one. The syndicate noticed. They sent more. Commander Haas arrived in the 5th week with a flagship and a full company of soldiers and the specific intention of ending the problem. He was efficient and thorough and he knew his work. He set up a forward base in the ruins of one of the burned settlements. A large prefabricated fortress that went up in 48 hours, surrounded by sensor nets and automated defense systems. Then he set a trap. He broadcast a false distress call on the colony emergency channel. A settlement called Finn's Ridge, urgent, imminent attack, please respond. It was well constructed. The coordinates were real. The signal matched the pattern of genuine colony communications. Finn knew it was a trap. He went anyway because if there was even a small chance it was real he could not leave it. They hit the ambush at full strength. 40 soldiers in prepared positions, heavier weapons than anything the syndicate had used before, and 3 ships overhead providing cover fire. Finn and Saya fought hard and moved fast and dismantled most of it, but the ships were the problem. The ships could not be outmaneuvered on the ground. Saya went up. She was faster in the air than any of the ships expected, and she took 2 of them out of the fight before the 3rd one adjusted and fired. The shot hit her right wing at the joint. Not a graze, a direct hit from a heavy weapon, the kind designed to bring down large creatures. The wing folded wrong. Saya dropped. She hit the ground hard and did not get back up. Finn saw it. He had been in the middle of the ground fight, 3 soldiers between him and her, and he saw her go down, and something in him that had been steady and controlled and professional for 4 years simply stopped being those things. He went through the 3 soldiers between him and Saya in about 4 seconds. He did not think about it. He did not plan it. He reached her and dropped to his knees beside her, and she was breathing, fast and shallow but breathing, and her wing was bent badly and she made a sound when he touched near the joint that he had never heard from her before. He looked up at the remaining ship. Then he looked at the fortress 2 kilometers east. Then he looked back at Saya. "Stay," he said quietly. "I'll be back." Saya looked at him with pain-dimmed amber eyes. She made a low sound. He stood up. He had no armor. He had left it behind in the repositioning after the 2nd colony fight because it slowed him down and he had decided speed mattered more. He had a rifle, a sidearm, and the data spike he had been carrying for 3 weeks. A device preloaded with every piece of evidence he had collected about the colony destruction, the population counts, the burned settlements, everything. He had planned to use it when the time was right. The time was now. He walked toward the fortress. Not ran. Walked. Steady and even, like he had somewhere to be and was not in a hurry about it. The remaining ship tracked him and fired twice. He was not where the shots landed. He moved through the sensor net using the gaps he had mapped from the captured Syndicate equipment the week before, and he went in through the maintenance access on the east wall because that was where the sensor coverage was thinnest. Inside the fortress he moved through the corridors quietly and quickly, and he did not stop for anything that was not between him and the command center. Some things were between him and the command center. He dealt with them. He found Haas in the command room. Haas was a broad, careful man who had clearly been in dangerous situations before and did not panic easily. He looked at Finn, one man, no armor, ember eyes burning bright in the dim room, and reached for his weapon. Finn was faster. He put Haas down without killing him, which took more effort than killing him would have, and then sat him against the wall and plugged the data spike into the command room's broadcast array, the same array the Syndicate had been using to coordinate its operations across the outer colonies. The array with the strongest signal in the sector, capable of reaching every galactic news network simultaneously. He uploaded everything. Population records. Coordinates of burned settlements. Ship logs. Operational orders with Haas's authorization codes on every one. He let it run and stood in the quiet command room and listened to it transmit. Ada found him sitting outside the fortress an hour later, waiting for the Dracry response teams that were already inbound, because when 14 galactic networks receive the same evidence package simultaneously, response teams tend to move quickly. She looked at him for a long moment. He had no armor, no backup, and a cut above his eye that had bled freely and dried. He looked like he had walked through something difficult and come out the other side by stubbornness alone. "How?" Ada said simply. Finn looked at her. "How did you survive that alone?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. He was thinking about Saya, who was being treated by the emergency medics he had called in before he entered the fortress, whose wing was broken but fixable, who had looked at him when the medics arrived with tired amber eyes that said, "I knew you'd come back." "I already died once," Finn said. "This wasn't close." Ada looked at him for a long moment. Then she sat down beside him and they waited together in the quiet for the ships to arrive. The Cavarth Syndicate did not fall all at once. It came apart the way large things usually do, slowly at first, then quickly. The broadcast from the Fortress Command Array reached 14 galactic networks in the same hour, and by the next morning it had reached 40 more. The evidence was clean and complete and thoroughly sourced, and there was nothing to argue within it. Population records. Burned coordinates. Authorization codes. Haas's signature on every operational order. The political pressure that followed was the kind that even powerful organizations cannot absorb. 3 systems withdrew contracts. 2 galactic oversight bodies opened formal investigations. 6 of the Syndicate's senior directors quietly resigned and disappeared before the proceedings began, which was an admission of its own kind. The remaining structure held for about 3 weeks and then stopped holding. Commander Haas was processed through the Dracry justice system, which was methodical and thorough and not particularly fast, but arrived at the right place eventually. The outer colonies were still standing. All 4 of them. Ada Marsh organized the relief effort herself, moving resources from the response teams into the settlements with the focused energy of someone who had been waiting a long time to do something other than survive. She sent Finn one message after it was over. It was 3 words. He read it twice and folded it into his jacket pocket and kept it there. It said, "We are here." Saya's wing took 2 months to heal fully. The Dracry medics were precise and careful and they did good work, but bone at the joint was slow and the wing needed to be held still, which Saya found deeply disagreeable. She bore it with the patience of something that had learned patience from a human and therefore knew exactly how long patience was supposed to last and was not interested in extending it further. Finn sat with her every evening. He did not talk much. He did not need to. He would sit beside her in the medical wing with his back against the warm stone wall and read through reports or maintenance logs or whatever was in front of him, and she would rest her head near his knee and close her eyes, and the ember glow in his eyes would settle down to its quietest level, the way it always did when she was close. On the day the medics cleared her wing, Saya stood up, extended it fully for the first time in 2 months and held it there for a long moment. The full span of it filled the medical room. 14 feet of pale gold membrane, the rich deep gold of her scales catching the light along the leading edge, the scar from the ship's weapon a clean dark line across the joint that had healed strong. She looked at Finn. He looked at the wing. Then at her face. "Good," he said quietly. Saya folded the wing back in and pressed her jaw briefly against the top of his head, which was the Dracry dragon equivalent of something that had no clean translation in human language but meant approximately, "Yes, it is." The ceremony was held on Vethra Prime, in the Elder Council's Great Hall. It was the oldest building on the planet, carved directly into the mountain rock thousands of years ago, when the Dracari were still learning what they were going to become. The walls were high and dark and covered in carvings that told the history of the bonded pairs, the Corvale and their dragons, the Guardians and their charges, going back further than written records. The carvings closest to the floor were the oldest. The ones near the ceiling were still sharp. There had been no new carving added in 3,000 years. The Elder Council stood in a line at the far end of the hall, 7 of them robed in the pale ceremonial cloth that was only worn on occasions that the Dracari considered permanent. Elder Drava stood at the center. She was older than when Finn had first met her, the white at the edges of her scales spread further now, but her eyes were the same, pale gold, steady, reading everything. Behind the elders stood the Dracari community, hundreds of them filling the hall in silence. Warriors, healers, scholars, hatchling trainers. And among them near the front, Trainer Breck. Old now, his scales faded at the shoulders, the scar along his jaw gone silver. He stood with his arms folded the way he always stood, still built like something assembled for a specific purpose, but slower than he had been. Finn stood in the center of the hall. He was wearing no ceremonial clothing. He had been offered it and declined, not out of disrespect but because it seemed wrong, like wearing a costume to something real. He wore his standard clothes, worn and clean with the data spike case still on his belt from habit. The scales along his forearms and collarbone caught the hall's low light. His ember eyes were calm and steady. Saya walked in from the far entrance. The hall went completely quiet. She had grown into herself fully now, not juvenile, not transitional but entirely what she was going to be. Large, even by Dracari standards, with the deep rich gold of mature scales and the dark markings along her jaw clear and sharp. The scar on her wing was visible from across the hall, a dark line on pale gold, permanent and unhidden. She moved through the hall with the quiet deliberate pace of something that knew exactly where it was going. She stopped in front of Finn. She looked at him for a moment with her amber eyes, the same eyes that had looked at him over the edge of a broken crate on a burning jungle moon, wide and frightened and uncertain. They were not uncertain now. They had not been uncertain for a long time. She lowered her head. Not a bow, not exactly. A placement, deliberate and slow, bringing her head level with his chest, her jaw resting near his shoulder, which was the oldest gesture in the Dracari bonding tradition and meant something that no translation could fully carry but that everyone in the hall understood completely. She spoke then, in Dracari in the formal register used only for the oldest ceremonies. Her voice was low and steady and filled the hall without effort. Finn did not speak Dracari fluently but he had learned enough in 5 years to follow the shape of it. The words for bond, for guardian, for permanent, for chosen. For Corvale. Elder Drava stepped forward when Saya finished and spoke the confirmation in a voice that carried to every corner of the hall. The words were old, worn smooth by 3,000 years of not being used and now needed again. Then she bowed. The 6 elders behind her bowed. And in the gathered crowd, slowly, one by one and then all at once, the Dracari bowed, warriors and healers and scholars and hatchling trainers and everyone between. Breck bowed last. He was slow about it, the way old things move when they move with full intention. He held it for a moment longer than anyone else. Then he straightened and looked at Finn across the hall with his flat pale eyes and said nothing. He did not need to. Finn put his hand against Saya's jaw the way he had since she was small enough to fit under his arm. She pressed into it. The 3 offers came in the weeks that followed. The first was from the Interstellar Coalition, a command position, significant authority, resources that most people spent careers trying to accumulate. The second was from the Dracari Elder Council itself. An advisory role, permanent posting on Vethra Prime, safety and stability and the respect of an entire civilization. The third was from a human governmental body that offered him things he did not bother reading past the second paragraph. He declined all 3 in the same week, in short polite messages that contained no explanation beyond the word no. Ambassador Voss heard about it and sent him a brief message asking simply why. Finn wrote back one line, "The work isn't finished." The intelligence report arrived on a quiet morning. It was flagged urgent and came through 3 separate channels simultaneously, which meant whoever had sent it wanted to make certain it was received. Finn was sitting in the small room he used as a workspace on Vethra Prime, Saya occupying most of the floor beside him in the way she did when she was resting but not sleeping, eyes half open, breathing slow, aware of everything. He read the report. It described something at the galaxy's far edge. A presence old enough that the oldest Dracari records mentioned it only in the sections that were written as warnings rather than history. It had been dormant. The latest sensor data from 4 separate deep-range stations suggested it was not dormant anymore. He read it through to the end. Then he set it down on the table and sat with it for a moment. Saya had opened her eyes fully. She was watching him with her amber eyes, reading his face the way she had always read it, completely, accurately, without needing him to say anything. He looked at her. She looked back. He picked the report back up. Somewhere in the galaxy, governments were convening emergency sessions. Admirals were drawing up contingency plans. Ancient alien minds were running calculations and arriving at numbers nobody wanted to say out loud. In a quiet room on Vethra Prime, a man with ember eyes and gold scales along his arms read a report about the end of something and the beginning of something worse, and a full-grown dragon watched him with steady amber eyes and waited. The galaxy called him many things by now. A legend in some systems. A warning in others. An impossibility in the records of every species that had studied the Corvale bond and concluded it could not exist in a human body. The Drackery called him Corvale. Ada Marsh called him the reason Crest Hill was still standing. Breck, when asked by younger warriors who the human was, said only, "He does not stay down," and left it at that. Saya did not call him any of these things. She pressed her jaw against his shoulder the way she had since she was small, and he put his hand against the side of her face the way he had since the day she chose him, and in that quiet room with the report in his hand and the ember light steady in his eyes, that was enough. It had always been enough. The work was not finished. They would go.